Okay,
Wonderful.
there is Zapata. All right, good afternoon, everyone. It is 3:32 p.m. I'm calling this meeting of the Maple Broadband Executive Committee to order for the 22nd of June, 2026. Happy day after the summer solstice, everyone. The first item on the agenda is to approve the agenda, and I would like to make a friendly amendment to the agenda because we need to do a bid opening for audit services. So I'd like to suggest that we do that after the executive director report and before we move on to discussions and key decisions. So I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda with my friendly amendment, unless anyone would like to reject my friendly amendment or make other amendments. Okay, is that a movement from Zapata? Okay, can I get a second? Shannon? Okay, any other edits to the agenda? All right, hearing none. All in favor of approving the agenda as modified, raise your hand or say aye. Okay, approval of the minutes from June 8th is next up, so you've all had a chance to review those minutes. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Okay, can I get a second? Okay, any comments, edits on the minutes? Okay, all in favor of approving them, raise your hand or say aye. Okay, great. That is approval of the minutes from June 8th. Next up is public comments. Would anyone like to make a public comment at this time? Okay, hearing none, we can move on to the chair report.
Yep, I have no chair report today. Let's move on.
Okay, we can move on to the executive director report. So my focuses right now are pretty much as you would expect them to be, which is mainly trying to make sure that I understand all of the requirements of the BEAD program and how to operationalize all that. So I have been going through the draft grant agreements to make sure that I understand that. And so that is ongoing. And then in parallel, of course, as we know, we're trying to close out our ARPA grants, our ARPA construction and pre-construction and that expenditure. So I have been in communication with the VCBB around the closeout. So first of all, I did submit, I think I said this to the governing board, but I'll say it again here. I did submit to the VCBB the final as-built records for phase 2, and I'm trying to work with Luck Grove to understand the process of getting to close out there. And then we have further down in the agenda, we have 2026 ARPA expenditures, so we can go into more detail there. The one thing I did want to highlight is this is not a big surprise, but it is a bit of bad news and a bit of a spoke in our wheels that our friends at Syracuse Utilities are not going to be able to help out with the buried work that we had anticipated doing this year. So that doesn't mean that we're not going to do it. It means that we're going to be looking at other alternatives to be able to do that for consideration. So I let Steve know that earlier today, and we have some ideas on it, and also have other ideas around what we might do in case we're not able to find a contractor for that work. So we can cover that in more detail under the section below. And then also we do the bid opening for the audit RFP, and according to our timetable, we're meant to have a decision in a couple of weeks' time at our next executive committee meeting on July 13th. So that's going to be something that we can talk about, is how we get from where we are to making a decision. We're going to have to get together a meeting of the finance committee and then come back to the executive committee with a recommendation. That's it for me. Any questions on what I'm up to? Obviously, just the normal stuff, keeping the trains running as well. Okay, so I'm going to move on then to the bid opening. So as we all know, we had an RFP out for audit services, and the Friday midnight last week was the official close of that. As expected, we received 3 bids from the 3 parties that indicated that they were going to bid. So in alphabetical order, we had a response from Batchelder Associates for $31,000, from Barry Dunn for $47,500, and from Baker Tilly for, $58,500. So those are the 3 bids that we received. So obviously we need to do bid leveling to make sure that they are in fact all apples to apples and that we follow the rules as outlined in the RFP around how it is that we make our decision. Okay, so moving on, the next thing we have up is 2026 ARPA expenditures. So actually, I think I have covered a lot of this in my executive director report to give you guys the headline of what's going on, but I think we can now now have as much of a discussion as you guys would like to have in this setting. I think Steve and I have some ideas that we have kicked around about what we might do, and my suggestion is that we take the balance of this week. One of the possibilities is that we're working with Eustis on the affordable drop program. If they have capacity, we can work with them. I'm also reaching out to some other CUDs that have active construction contracts to see if they have a contractor that they can recommend under contract that has buried crews available, and specifically bore crews, because some work we've talked about where it is, but it's bore work as opposed to trenching work, without going into too much detail in public session. As I said, this is not, it's a spoke in the wheel, but it's not a catastrophe at this point. I'm not extremely worried. I mean, we have only a couple of miles to do, and we have several months to get it done in. So, not, as I said, not terribly worried, but I have also started to think about, in the event that we're not able to find someone, or we're not able to find someone and we're not comfortable with whatever, the pricing or the quality or anything along those lines. I do have a couple of other ideas about what we might do, but let's cross that bridge if and when we come to it.
Question, Ellie.
Yeah.
When it comes to having a contractor provide the buried services, is that also running the cable, or is that simply providing the trench and or the bore location in which the utility itself can be pulled by someone else?
Well, we need someone. What we're looking for, especially in this tight time frame, and how it usually works, is that you contract with someone to do all of that. So
Okay.
it's from start to finish of deploying the mainline fiber. So if it's buried, then it's trenching or boring, placing a conduit, pulling or blowing the fiber into the conduit, installing pedestals or handholds, and then doing splicing and testing. So that's the complete scope of the service. And just to add a little bit more complexity, we provide some of the materials, like we provide the fiber optic cable, but almost everything else, or I think maybe everything else, in the case of buried, we are expecting the contractor to provide.
Thank you.
So I mean, the one other update I guess I can add here is that I had just, again, given the time frame here with ARPA, that our friends at WCVT have some preferences around both aerial and buried enclosures, splice enclosures. And so I asked them if we might be able to pull from their stock, and they said no, they're not. All of their stock is tied up in their own builds. And so I said, okay, well, that's fine. That just means that we're going to have to get whatever contractor we work with, we're going to have to get a list of what they can actually supply in this time frame, and you can pick whatever you dislike the least. But obviously, we're not going to let our ARPA money go back to the U.S. Treasury because we're not able to get Corning 530s in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah, Ellie, I mean, we're going to deploy what we need to deploy, but we're going to hear some serious pushback from WCVT if we don't deploy those Corning 530s. That's kind of the base of their design. That's how the drops are extended out of there. I think we need to kind of be careful about how we approach that. And we also know that there's lead time issues with those closures because we ran into them in the past. So I don't know what to do about it, but I can't worry about if we inform WCVT that we're going to use like a Tyco enclosure or something else.
Yeah.
There's no alternate. In other words, the problem is that it's kind of a proprietary solution, and it really nobody else offers something like it.
Yep. I mean, I did already tell them a week ago, and they didn't squawk. And they do also have the opportunity to provide from their own stock and move things around. I mean, they do have some agency in this. So we'll find out what's available, and we'll let them make a choice. Because I agree with you. I mean, it would be ideal not to have this situation, but I for one was not expecting the end date for ARPA to be the end of September. I was expecting it to be the end of November. So that constrains things. Okay. Anything else on that? Okay. So the next item is performance insights. So Steve had asked that we add this to the agenda. This is around the website, Steve.
I'm waiting for the light to go on over my head. I have no idea what I was asking for.
Okay, so you forwarded to me and to London Middlebury some Google Analytics reports that showed traffic on different portions of the website, and you
Yeah.
asked that the executive committee receive this report. And so maybe you didn't actually ask for it to be talked about in the agenda, but I said, okay, well, rather than send the executive committee a report that they don't know how to interpret, let's have a conversation with the executive committee around the website and traffic metrics and what information they want to see and why and what they want to do with it, so that I can then work with London Middlebury to make sure that whatever insights you guys might want to have around our website traffic or other performance metrics, that I'm delivering that. Because the last
Thank you.
thing we all need is another email that we don't read that has numbers in it that we just goes in one ear and out the other. Because I tell you what, I got enough of those.
Do you perchance have that email that I forwarded on? If you
Yes,
don't, I can find it.
I can find it and call it up.
Yeah, because there really truly was one section only. So what happens is when we first built the website, Dan Sonneborn, who was a former executive committee member, and I set the website up and used part of the process, including the tool used to manage the website, was involved Google. So there was Google Analytics. They've been tracking our activities since the beginning of our website, and about every 6 months, I received this at my home email, my personal email address, because at the time we didn't have Maple Broadband domain. And so I've just been tossing it out and disregarding it. But if you scroll down, Ellie, to the next section below that, performance insights, and then can kind of zoom in on it, that is what I thought was very interesting. And I don't personally believe that it requires some in-depth analysis. It's really more about the fact that there's traffic going on our website. It's consequential. And by looking at these three columns, we can get a sense of the fact that what we're doing is gaining engagement from our community. And that was the extent of what I thought would be helpful for the executive committee to be aware of. I was not proposing to Ellie or to London Middlebury that we want to drill down. We may want to drill down. That's certainly executive committee's option to pursue this. Mostly, I haven't looked at these lately, and I was quite impressed with the fact that we are getting engagement right where we'd like to see it, and the details associated with it. So, kind of open the floor to any thoughts, but as far as I'm concerned, we can look at this and say, good information, no need to pursue it, which probably would be my proposal. Any thoughts?
I guess I would say not presuming to know or to second guess what London Middlebury is doing, but I'm hoping that they're at least like setting up campaign codes, campaign IDs for specific mailers, flyers, etc., that then you can then dig down a little bit deeper and track the response rates from all of those. I'm assuming they are, but I just wanted to mention that that's pretty much an industry standard kind of thing that you would do with.
Yep, they definitely are. I mean, if you click on things from our newsletter, for example, you can see the UTM, which is the tag for the source.
Perfect.
And actually, that's one of the things that I've asked for in our next meeting is having a look at our remaining promotions budget and having a look at our campaign tracking and just basically having a strategic check-in on all that.
Okay. Yeah, as long as, like I said, I assumed that they were, but I just wanted to confirm that. So yeah, that's cool.
Okay.
Other thoughts?
I mean, my only thing is I glance at it when you say the number of new subscribers. This would be another thing I would glance at because I am fully expecting that they are following their own performance standards and are recognizing what's working, not working, and making decisions accordingly. And so I don't think I would be able to provide any better context of information or questions around that.
Thank you. I agree.
Okay.
Anybody has, if there's no objection, let's just move on.
Okay. All right, so the next item then is continuity of operations plan. So you will recognize this one from our parking lot that I raised it some time ago because this is a subject that came up as part of the VCBB's recoupment and transfer of assets policy. That policy was passed by the VCBB board at the last board meeting, whenever that was, 2 weeks ago. It was 2 weeks ago, 1 week ago, whatever it was, 1 week ago, I think. And so one of the items in there is referencing that CED should have a continuity of operations plan, which is quite correct, that we should be thinking about what are the sorts of situations in which, if an emergency happened or if a change to the status quo happened, what we would do to maintain continuity for our subscribers. So what specifically triggered this is that Steve and I received a mail from Jose Aguayo at the VCBB asking if we could send along our latest continuity of operations plan, and or if we would like some help in creating one. So I wanted to have this conversation here. Steve and I did have touch base on it a little bit earlier, so Steve, feel free to jump in to supplement the conversation. But I think he and I are on the same page with this, which is that yes, we agree this is an important thing to be doing, and however, that said, we have a couple of really time-critical items that are going on right now with the long drop program, trying to close out ARPA, trying to get BEAD spun up. And so what we would like to do is essentially respond and say, we don't have one. And yes, we understand that we would need to make one. And yes, let's collaborate with you on what's involved there. But I think the conversation that we wanted to have here, Steve and I, is to just have the start of what do we think what are the key topics that we think should be included in here? Because one of the challenges is how long is a piece of string? I mean, you could have everything under the sun in your continuity of operations plan, and then it becomes a thing which is like this thick, it sits on the shelf and no one ever reads. And so I think the point of these things is it's sort of, I feel about this the way that I do about a business model versus a business plan. Like, I think business plan is frankly a waste of paper and human capital. Like, the business model and the assumptions that drive it is really the value there. And the same thing with continuity of operations plan. And the real value is the thinking into what are the scenarios that we might want to think about and react to, and what are the early warning signs, and how do we, like, if something were to happen, what would we do? So a couple of the things that we have talked about is, number one, what would happen if we are become in some sort of financial distress, right? And what are the early warning signs of financial distress, like high churn, competitors getting into a price war, something along those lines. Another one would be what happens if our friendly friends at WCBT are taken over by a private equity firm and we no longer have friendly people on the other side of conference calls and we have less friendly people. Like, what would that look like? Another one that we have talked about is how do we, because for the next however long, 18 to 24 months, we don't anticipate any changes to staffing or resource availability because we have active network builds going on. But when we do wrap up with BEAD, then it's not, and we've talked about this many times, it's not going to be needed to have an executive director working the number of hours that I'm working. So what does that look like? And how do we make sure that we are paying attention, number one, to the day-to-day, and number two, to the longer term macro changes that might create threats for the district? So those are kind of the top three. I mean, you could potentially include in there as well what happens if I get hit by a bus, because frankly, we don't have a lot of redundancy right now if that were to happen. But I'm not planning to get hit by a bus, but then again, no one ever is. So, that would be a potential fourth one. So I'm done talking. You guys can talk.
Yeah, so, I think what's, generally, there's no shortage of work that we've got before us right now. And so I'm all for Ellie's proposed approach. It's a two-prong approach. One is to inform Jose what she just said, and then add it to our parking lot. We want to add some granularity. The items that Ellie listed kind of are what she and I had discussed, and I think they're all fairly valid and definitely need attention. And if we tell Jose, when we have time, we'll begin to expand on this, but here's where we are now. And if VCBB could provide assistance, it would be welcome. Thoughts?
So I guess I do have a couple of thoughts based on what you just said, Ellie. That makes a whole lot of sense because when I was reading the email, Steve, that you sent out, it almost sounded like it was more infrastructure based and communications based with like our municipalities as opposed to internal structure, warning signs, response. And so, and honestly, the email did not make a whole lot of sense to me. For what we, I think, wanted to get out of it. So how you described it, Ellie, makes a lot more sense. Not that some of what's in this email isn't something we should still be taking into consideration as far as redundancy and making sure that people have service when there's, I don't know, an emergency, a disaster or something, but maybe we'll get a tornado, not in Lincoln, but in Middlebury. Yeah, so I'm good with that. I think it's really helpful to start jotting out identifying our own priorities and even having a third party also start to outline some of what they think are priorities that we may not even be considering, and then starting to flush out the details underneath those as it may make sense for us to do.
Yeah, and I had a similar thought as well, which is that, I mean, a lot of what you might typically put under continuity of operations has to do with disaster response, like, either physical infrastructure or digital infrastructure, like a cybersecurity hack. And neither of those is really for us. Those are both for our operating partner. And the most that we can really do is to make sure that our network management agreement with them protects our interests. And I hope that they're doing what they should be doing, which they presumably are because they've been around for a long time and we know them and we trust them. Jen, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say that I agree with, asking VCBB for help, and because they got templates for it already, or they've seen other examples, so that it would at least give us the starting point, and then we can customize it afterwards. So I think that all makes sense.
Yep.
Okay. And nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
No.
Sorry,
Agreed.
I just had to add that.
Yeah, but I mean, as I've said before, I do think it's a good thing for our district to be doing because we don't want to be like, should we be in a situation where all of a sudden we're losing subscribers left, right, and center, and we're not sure if we can keep the lights on? We shouldn't be thinking in a panic state, what do we do? It's much better to be thinking with clear heads outside of any sort of crisis. How would we handle the situation? And what are the factors in our decision, and what are some of the steps we should take? And then that way, hopefully it never happens, but if it does, then at least we've pre-done the thinking, and whoever's sitting in our chairs, maybe it's us or maybe it's other people, has the benefit of that. Lynn.
I was just thinking too about who sits on the finance committee. And at some point when we have a draft of it, we may want to just share it with the finance committee, only because there's several people in that committee who have deep experience in all sorts of things and just might be an interesting set of eyes on it.
Yep, exactly. And we'd actually talked about this with the finance committee some months ago, if you recall, because I think some aspects of this, I mean, arguably fall with finance committee to be doing that initial brainstorming, if not drafting, especially around like what are the early warning signs financially, and I mean, like operationally not so much, but I totally agree we should make use of that committee, and we can talk about it in the committee meeting we're going to have to talk about the audit RFP responses.
Okay, great.
Okay, anything else on this? If not, we can move on. Okay. So Finance Committee has not met, but as we've just discussed, we will be meeting shortly to talk about the audit RFP responses. If anyone else in the Executive Committee is dying to see them and participate in the bid leveling, let me know. Otherwise, yeah, I know, I figured. Okay, so next up is Affordable Drop Program. Alex, give an update?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Let me pull up my handy dandy slide here. Share my screen. So since the last time we spoke, we've made a lot of progress on a couple categories, not a lot of progress on some others. The good news is that we have gotten some customers with the trenches fully complete. Have not gotten the kind of invoice and final wrap up on those from Eustace, but Steve was out there in the field verifying the work that was happening mid process, and because we've reached a couple through this milestone, we're working out the kinks in that part of the process, which is good. We've got some new contracts signed, a bunch of new site surveys complete. The piece where we're going to really need to start working harder is how do we expand the wide end of the funnel. So Ellie, we should have a conversation about that. I'm sure you've tried everything already, marketing wise, Front Porch Forum, Addison Independent, whatever the case may be. But if there's an opportunity to put some resources to widening the funnel, now's the time to do that so we can make sure to get it in this year. But any questions from the group on how things are going here?
So I have one question and maybe one suggestion. My first question is, with the contracts that were signed, I'm assuming that the adjustment to the time commitment was corrected.
Oh yeah, all of the original contracts that had the wrong time commitment were either have been corrected and signed at this point. A few people signed them with slightly longer time commitments than we had otherwise intended, but everyone's happy at the very least. So
okay, great. And then my comment is, I know this has to do with I'll say salary income-based levels. Are there any organizations that work in Addison County that provide those types of services to the population that we're trying to connect with, and whether or not they might be in a position to have or share that information to their client base that they're already serving? And Meals on Wheels or whatever, all those various services that are often employed in that capacity.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I have allocated some time in the next London Middlebury meeting specifically to talking about this. I'm trying to get it when I get the invites. Alex, I'll see if you're available. I think it's going to be 1:30 to 2:30 tomorrow, but I don't actually have the invite yet. Because I've had a similar conversation with Heron Herzog, who's the VCBB's comms person, and they're looking to do a statewide press release that sometimes helps a little bit. But I think we have done a lot of activities in terms of direct consumer marketing. We've done all the digital things, the newsletter, the Front Porch Forum, Front Porch Forum, the digital ads, and all of that. And we've done a mailer that wasn't ADP specific, but was designed to generate interest. And we have seen an uptake in people registering for service as a result of that. But how many of them will actually qualify for the ADP program? Don't know. We sent someone door to door to do canvassing, and he knocked on 330 houses. And as a result of that, we've seen maybe a dozen that, no one signed up on the day, but maybe a dozen signed up later. So those were further up in the funnel. And then he did 2 rounds of outbound calling to the people that were needing conduit in our crowd fiber. And then Alex is finishing that up and is calling them. And then we were just mailing today. He's going to do another round of calls, the ones that are non-responsive. Then we're going to do a direct mailing specifically to those targeted addresses, just because some people don't answer their phone if it's not a known number. I'm one of them, to be honest. So if there's not a way to leave a message, we want to try another avenue for those people. Maybe an email as well wouldn't hurt, but that can also go to spam. And then another round of calls a couple of weeks later for the ones that are still non-responsive. But it is probably a good time to be thinking about other things that we can do, because what immediately comes to mind, hearing you, Zapata, has done a lot of direct to consumer. We haven't done a lot of B2B2C. And so that seems like a really good avenue to go down. Is let's try that and see what that gets us. Lynn.
Yeah, there's I think I don't know if it's still happening or not, but I believe that they were gonna still be doing maybe some school meals to folks, and those are usually lower income and obviously have families. I don't know, there's a lot of organizations who are working behind the scenes to provide those services to folks who need them, and maybe they have some suggestions or can share information.
Mhm.
Sorry, Lynn, go ahead.
That's okay. So I think it's a great idea, and I was just going to throw out one suggestion, which is the open door clinic. You know, they do a lot of referral work, and the Middlebury Co-op has a program called Food for All, and a couple of their staff went to nonprofit organizations that serve underserved Vermonters, and they doubled the number of people who could access Food for All, which is a program through the co-op. So I do think that's a good idea. The Open Door Clinic was one of the places they connected. Acorn was another place they connected. So anyway, I don't think it can hurt, and they're not going to give you the names of people, but they will say, do you know about this?
Yeah, and that's all we're asking for. Is we're asking for organizations to raise awareness. So those are great suggestions.
The last one to throw in there, just because we're doing outreach already to municipal and municipal customers, is, you know, we're talking to the Cornish Volunteer Fire Department. Well, they've probably got 15 or 20 volunteer firefighters, and maybe there's some referral kind of program we could set up for the outreach to those institutions we're doing already.
Yep. So these are all great ideas. So hopefully we'll have some good progress to report, or at least some activities that we engage in as a result of that soon. Anything else on the Affordable Drop program?
Thanks, everyone.
Okay. I have ARPA on here twice. That is probably a mistake. I don't think that there's any updates on ARPA that wasn't covered above by the ARPA expenditures. So I think we can skip down to BEAD. So the BEAD updates are the VCBB has published a revised BEAD subgrantee grant template to clarify some things from feedback received. So I'm busy reading that. Other than that, I think I said already at the governing board, but I submitted everything that is needed in terms of NEPA and the budget. I haven't heard anything back on either of those at this stage. And so the focus now is we have try to finalize with JSI the bill of materials in order to get a construction RFP out. So I'm working on drafting construction RFP and construction oversight RFP that will go to Steve before they go anywhere else, so that we can get those issued. And then start to work on permitting and environmental. Okay. All right. Parking lot. So in the parking lot in particular, I guess I'll just start from the top. Would you guys like me to share my screen? Okay, let me do that. There were some updates this week. Can you see that? Is that big enough? Should I make it bigger?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So the consumer complaints process, I did add that to London Middlebury's task list because it had just been sitting there for a while with no activity, and it is required by VCBB policy, and we do have the new website up now. So I said, okay, let's get on this. I think they had some ideas from some time back that we needed to recall and talk about how we wanted to do it. And then the next thing is the network management agreement. So Steve and I had a meeting with Roger Nishi last week, Monday, where he said that he had reviewed all of the changes that I'd worked on with their contract consultant, Eileen, and he was happy with everything. And he thought in his head that there was something that was outstanding and he wasn't sure what it was, so he was going to check in with her. And then the ball's in his court, either to say, here's one remaining item and let's get together to talk about it, or to say, all right, we are good with these changes and produce a clean version for execution. So, and this is essentially to take the current network management agreement and level set it with our current understanding of how things work, because there's some things in there that are just frankly not correct at all and that are not how we want them to be, and we want to correct that. And then separately after that, there are probably some changes required to the network management agreement as a direct result of BEAD that will be, we need to, and the good news again is that we have this BEAD grant agreement now from the VCBB so we can understand what it actually says and pluck out what those changes are. And then completely separate to the network management agreement, there's going to need to be some work with WCVT on the portion of the network bill that falls into their ILEC footprint, but that's not a network management agreement related item. So, but want to give an update that the very first step is to get the current network management agreement updated to reflect how we want it to be, completely aside from BEAD. So we are waiting on that. That ball's in Roger's court.
You didn't see Roger's email.
Oh, no, I didn't see Roger's email. What did he say?
We're good to go. They have no change, no issues.
Okay, well, there we go. Thank you. So that's great. So
Well,
now we're waiting on an execution version.
Yeah, so I think that's what we talked a little bit about this this morning, but maybe we didn't drill down far enough. So a lawyer must convert all the understandings into an agreement that everyone can concur with. Is that correct? Does it go to a lawyer? Does it go to two lawyers? How's it done?
Well, I guess that's something we can talk about. So Eileen has drafted it as here's the original document and then here's the edits to the original document, but she's drafted it in as close to legal language as one can get. It would behoove us, I think, to have the council look over that. And then also the VCBB, one of the things that they reserve the right to do in our grant agreements is to pre-approve major contracts of this sort. And so we need to pass the thing to them as well. So knowing that the VCBB legal is going to be having a look at it, we can have a talk about whether or not we want to have our own lawyer have a look at it as well. And if so, there's lots of different lawyers we work with. So what skills are we looking for here in particular? Because the ones we work with in Vermont are like just general contract law people, and the ones we work with in DC are significantly more expensive, but have a better understanding of regulatory and telecom and compliance. So what do you guys think? Lynn?
I know the DC attorneys are more expensive, but it feels like that would be who you would want to review the legal agreement because they have the expertise to look at it and figure out if there's anything in there that doesn't make sense.
From a distance, I watched what was going on, but had very little to say during that process. But I know Ellie had lengthy conversations with Argent Fox Shift, and they provided 100, 200 comments about that document. Lots and lots of stuff. Some of it seemed to me to be maybe really important, and some of it didn't seem to be very important at all. I guess I would worry that they're going to go back in and point out all the things that need to be done to make the agreement more to their satisfaction, which I think we've already made those decisions. Ellie has largely made all decisions needed to be made to either accept changes or not. So I don't know how to actually broach that. I don't think I'd object to going to Argent Fox Schiff if that's where she wants to go. We do have a relationship with them now, but I think we'd want to be really careful on scoping what our expectations are so that they're focusing on what matters and not things that have already been adjudicated.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, we're the clients, so ultimately we get to say what we want or not. They're not the clients.
Right.
And I think if they're providing, lengthy feedback, it's because they're doing that as our advocate in any type of relationship. And Adam, you should chime in here because you're an attorney. If they've already provided a lot of feedback and Ellie, you and Steve have said, and Roger and Eileen have said yes or no, and finally have an agreement. that everybody seems to be on the same page about, that, it's in some ways feels like this is kind of the final look and just kind of peace of mind a little bit. And if that's not what we're going to get, then maybe it does make sense to talk about who does the final review.
Yeah, Adam.
Yeah, so we've been working on this for a while, and I guess I need a little kind of update, but I know we hired the folks from DC, or we chose the folks from DC the last time. I know they went through this with you, or started the work with you. I don't know exactly where or how they left off. And I guess that's a question, is where how we left our relationship with them. Other than price, is there a reason to switch horses, and how much would they have to do to kind of look at it and get themselves right back up to speed?
It's hard to say how much time so the council we were working with retired. So that's one thing, is that we'd be working with a new person who was involved, but not directly. But this was like a very long time ago. I want to say it was actually 2 years ago that we started this process. So regardless, they're going to have to refamiliarize themselves. And just to give a bit of a refresher, because Zapata wasn't on the committee, I think Shannon was, Lynn wasn't, but it's been a long time. So what we originally briefed them to do was to say, here's our current network management agreement, have a look at it and tell us where you think it could be improved. And exactly to Lynn's point, they found numerous things that were either vague or did not serve us. And then we worked with them to come up with a version that we thought. So the first thing we did is we pulled out from that, because there's, in my head, this is an oversimplification, but there are management decisions and then there's legalese, right? I mean, I understand there can be some overlap between the two. So one of it is, how do you want things to work? And the other one of it is, how is it actually phrased in the document? And so we pulled out all the things that we thought were substantive management decisions or changes into a document with a bunch of, basically a bullet point document. There's like a page and a half long. Went over that with Roger to say, Roger, do you agree with all of these changes? Roger said, absolutely, yes, I agree with these changes. And we then had Arnfak Schiff take that agreement and modify the network management agreement to reflect those changes. And then we went over that with Roger for 2 hours, and he said he's very happy with everything. Might have even been 3 hours. And then their contract consultant got a hold of it and basically said, no, this is too dramatic of changes. We need to this is not going to work. And we said, okay, well, you're not going to modify an agreement if you don't have both parties, but like we do agree on the substance of what we want changed here. So if you don't like what our lawyers have done with taking the pen, if you think that's too dramatic, okay, fine, like we'll do it your way. And so you guys take the lead on taking the concepts we've already agreed and updating the language in a way that makes you happy. That's where we are now, is the list of changes that we want to have happen. We have been consistent on for the last 18 months, and we're just trying to get language which actually reflects those. And so I think that the brief to the legal firm this time is to say, listen, like this is just politically, this is how it's going to have to go down. We have this agreement, we have these changes. We need you to comment on the wording of the changes and see if there's any changes you'd make, or also, again, looking at the thing in the totality, if there are any major exposures for us as Maple Broadband that haven't been addressed, let's flag those now, because again, just practically, I think we want to get this thing signed up, but then we should be aware of what those are, because we're going to have to open it up again for BEAD. And part of the opening it up for BEAD is that there's going to be more extensive, there's going to be someone watching over the two of us that has quite a lot of power here. And so that would probably potentially give us the angle to be talking about any major exposures for our organization that aren't addressed. So that's the whole history.
But go ahead, Adam, keep going.
When you say there's going to be somebody watching over us, do you mean VCBB or do you mean somebody else?
VCB, and we don't know yet to what degree NTIA or NIST or others will be looking over their shoulder, because we're aware that we are a municipal entity and that is a particular category of risk according to the current NTIA. So we just don't know. Yes, it's going to be VCBB, but we have no idea what's going to come. It could be more of the same. It could be very different.
All right. Yeah, I don't think we can rely on VCBB to watch out on between our interests and WCVT's necessarily. If they're investing money with us, I suppose it'll help, but I don't think we can necessarily rely on them. So we do need our own representative. I don't have a good answer for you, Ellie, though. I can't, given just that summary, I can't pick a winner for you necessarily. I think it could be either. It doesn't sound like it sounds like you made business changes with WCVT, not necessarily legal or NIST or other telecom specific things. But I don't know that.
I think they were mostly management changes or clarifications of who actually has the responsibility. Like the current one, for example, implies that they are the internet service provider, when in fact we are the internet service provider. So that's one which is not great for them. It's been, I don't have these things immediately to mind. They've been sitting with Roger for some weeks now. But I think, and just to be clear, I think that the BEAD agreement and the oversight of that, the reason that I think that is a fundamentally different kind of beast than what we've had to deal with before, because we have never before with the ARPA had the threat of, like, the actual real threat of a termination of grant or recoupment of funds because we haven't followed some little detail, right? And that is an actual real possibility now. And we know that, Waitsfield knows that. And so I think the thing is that if there are details where they have heretofore, for understandable reasons, because I'd behave the same if I were them, not wanted to sign up to too stringent of an obligation, if one of those gets changed under BEAD, then it kind of is the way that it is. So I think that the BEAD contract changes things in terms of just in terms of the stakes for both parties, not in terms of the VCBB having any sort of a specific role looking after our rights. It's our job to be looking after our own rights and interests because we're the ones that's party to this agreement. And we do have a good partner. I think that that's worth repeating, that, what the situation we're tackling is not, I can tell you as a matter of practical fact, I don't think any of us ever looks at the network management agreement. We go about our business and we work collaboratively, and the relationship is a very good relationship, and that's how it typically is in business. You guys all know that you only look at the contract when there's a problem and a reason to look at the contract. And so that's the reason we're going through this exercise, is for both of us, just to make sure that if the bodies on either side of the screens change in the future, that the contract actually reflects what we really want it to say. So I think that, the real thing is just, again, as I was saying earlier, what are we looking for in a review here? If we're looking for a basic contract law, we could pass it to the Vermont people. If we're looking for contract law plus an understanding of telecom and regulation, which I do think is what we're doing, then we should pass it past the DC folks. But again, we should be very clear in our brief that we're not reopening past this. So we want them to have a look at what's here, suggest a red line if they're not happy with the wording of something, and if they discover some major gap or vulnerability that we have as an organization, let us know, and we will take that under consideration for the future.
Are you proposing that Eileen's quasi-legal document is going to be the basis for going forward? Is that our expectation?
That is their expectation.
All right. I think the other thing that occurred to me is this is a bilateral effort, and I think we're talking about what we're going to do, and I think we need to also have a conversation with WCVT. When we did the existing network management agreement, Magna Dodge and I worked on it, and it was the only two party, we spoke directly with Roger, and Roger spoke directly with us. The lawyer was never on the call. It was always the lawyer communicating with us on the side. So one question is, are we going to continue that approach on this go around? Are we going to basically, Ellie and I will represent our interest as expressed to us by our lawyer, or are we going to ask our lawyers to have conversations with Roger's lawyer? I know from the past experience, Roger didn't involve a lawyer. He used Eileen, the one that is currently his consultant, who's provided the feedback that Ellie's describing. And I think if it was left to Roger, he'd probably go with what our lawyer did, provided Eileen said it was okay, which would be a great way to go. But I don't know. Do we want to ask Roger now that he said we're in alignment? How do you see this proceeding to make sure that we don't have any misunderstandings? Who's going to do what? Here's what we think we want. Here's what we think happens next. Does this make sense to you?
Yeah, I think we can say that. I think we can say that we'll take the clean version that Eileen has prepared, and we're going to need to, as he knows, we're going to need the VCB to review it, and we're going to get our own counsel to review it, and then any red line commentary on that we can talk about. And I think if it comes to it, if there's some sort of a thing that our lawyer says is very important, then I don't have a problem having our lawyer speak to Eileen, because this is, like, to me, she's acting as their counsel, even if she's not a counsel. And so, like, let them, I mean, it's very common in contract negotiations to have counsel to counsel kind of meetings, where the client isn't there and they argue over the legalese.
Yep. Yeah, I'm your proposed approach, I support. Basically, here's the path that we'd like to follow. Roger, let us know if you disagree, and then once we get something that's moved it forward, we'll bring that document to you, and then you can give it a view.
Yeah, and I think, to be clear, I think the mistake that we made, or that I made earlier, was that we were having conversations with Roger thinking that he was the decision maker, when in fact Eileen was the real person that he relies on, and she wasn't involved. She wasn't in the loop. And then because she wasn't in the loop, she had missed all of our weeks and weeks of understanding the context, and she didn't have a chance to participate earlier with the drafting that our counsel did. So I can see why she had a bit of a panic and said, oh my gosh, like, this is completely different than what I'm expecting. And this is, like, why have such a dramatic change? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So, it's a learning experience. And then, but I think, because we did gloss over this a little bit, but I think that one of the things, it's not ideal to me to have here's the original document and then here's a document that modifies the original document, because then if you want to know what the actual reality is, you need to look at both documents and have them both in your head. And it's really not great, but I don't want to have that exercise holding us up from getting the thing executed. So I think we should have the legal review of it in the structure it's in now, execute it, probably do the same thing for BEAD. And then as time and money and interest allows, we could work on having an update that actually reflects all of the changes that have been made, so that it's easier for future people to read. But I wanted to separate that out, because number one, it's what they're expecting, and number two, it's going to add further time to this process. And I really want to have there be a stable base on which we start to analyze and layer on BEAD changes, because we don't have a lot of time to be making any changes that are a direct result of the BEAD grant.
I support that.
Anything else on this one? It's an important topic. So I know we are covering it as part of the parking lot, but it's important.
Yeah, I think the only thing that you and I discussed briefly this morning, and I kind of was not entirely certain, is that there's the network management agreement, which covers, the entirety of our relationship with WCVT. And then there is at least one more document, as I recall, that's going to have to be executed between ourselves and WCVT that talks about BEAD compliance. So is there another agreement? Should we add a BEAD agreement to the parking lot?
Yes, we did talk about that, and yes, I think we should. So in my head, at least, there are two categories of things that are required under the BEAD program. So number one is, where Maple Broadband is the service provider, what are the changes or more stringent requirements that are now required as a result of receiving BEAD funds that necessitate a change to the service levels or the nature of service or whatever it may be that Waitsfield's providing for us. So there are probably going to be some changes in that category. Possibly it's a null set, I don't know, but I think just to pick one example off the top of my head, the BEAD requires us to install to have no more than 10 days from customer order to installation. We are right now nowhere near that. So that is something that we're going to have to put a modification in there. And in the event that we're not able to do it, and that someone comes to recoup funds or have some sort of a clawback, like we need to work out the details of how that's going to work. So that's an example of the sort of thing that's going to need to go into the network management agreement. And then separately from that, BEAD is funding network builds in areas, for example, Lincoln and Starksboro, where we are not the service provider. The service provider is Green Mountain Access. And so the grant is funding it, but they are doing the design, build, and operation of that service. And so the complete stack of BEAD requirements, from BABA compliance to Davis-Bacon compliance with contractors to that 10-day time from installation to order, that's also a requirement under the BEAD program that we need them to be committing to. And again, if they fail to do something and someone comes after us for money, then we need to be held harmless, just as a concept. That really has nothing to do with our network management agreement, and it would probably be extremely confusing to try and munge our network management agreement with BEAD-specific design, build, operate for Green Mountain Access. So my assertion at this point is that those are two separate legal agreements, that we have modifications to our NMA that are a direct result of BEAD, and then another agreement that deals with their design, build, operate in the towns that are within their ILEC footprint. I could be persuaded otherwise, but that's what makes sense to me at this point.
Ellie, does BEAD have operating requirements in addition to build requirements?
It does.
So you're going to have to include some BEAD in the operation as well.
Yep.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, I was saying earlier there's a null set, but just off the top of my head, that can't be true, because there's the time from order to installation, there is the total network uptime, and there's also the speed and latency, which might be in there, but if they're not clearly defined, they need to be clearly defined. Not that I have any worries whatsoever about that, but yeah, there are a couple of things that are not quite aligned between what our network management agreement says right now and what BEAD requires. So lots of work to be done. Shall I continue with so I think to Steve's point, I can add something to the bottom of the parking lot here, which deals with a BEAD agreement specific to the Green Mountain Access build and operation. Is there something you want to say, Adam?
No, I was just going to say I do think I was going to close out loop back to our conversation and say that there are still BEAD requirements, and that was the reason we did get the DC attorneys in the first place. They were involved. I like the fact that you and Steve are dealing with Roger and they're behind the scenes, but I think it's important to have them behind the scenes for you. So I like your approach going forward.
Yeah. So it's actually a good point, because we have on here a task that's eventually going to come off the parking lot for the network management agreement, and this is the cleanup of it to reflect the party's current understanding of how things should be without BEAD. And then we have two separate other items to go in the parking lot. One is the BEAD specific changes to that as anticipated. We need to first understand them and then negotiate them and then get that codified. And then the second is the Green Mountain Access portion. So I will add both of those after this meeting. Okay, I'm going to continue on with other items in the parking lot. So the audit RFP, we have received 3 responses, and then the next step is to discuss with the Finance Committee. And then on Old Town Road, I know Steve has been quite active. You've been in communication with JSI about remediation, but with JSI and Eustace about remediation of the work completed last year and future plans. Do you want to talk about that? Steve,
Well, sorry.
did you want to talk about the Old Town Road work that you're doing?
Sure. There's a number of actions with Green Mountain Power, two of which are related to Old Town Road. The third one is related to building, when the time comes, building out the Middlebury hub. The two for Old Town Road relate to the being able to join Green Mountain Power when they begin the construction on the east end of the road. And we don't have details on that, but I think I can gather that information when I meet with Keith Wetmore, who is the Old Town Road Green Mountain Power project manager, on site tomorrow morning. And what we're going to do is I purchased a combination padlock, and we're going to participate in securing the gate to the Old Town Road, the West End gate. And so there's multiple padlocks that are all ganged together there, and we'll be joining that gang. And so we'll be in a position where we can open the gate whenever we're doing work up there, under the understanding that equipment can't be working on the Old Town Road until it's been inspected by the National Forest Service for cleanliness. So there's some precursor steps that need to be taken, but ultimately giving us ready access to the entirety of that west end of the Old Town Road where there's necessary remediation needed for every one of the 7 handholds there. We will then be able to access that pretty quickly whenever we need to. And working with our friends or our contractor at Eustis to get that moving. We essentially, it's a little bit of a touchy issue because they did a terrible job on the installation. We brought in JSI to inspect the work that they had done. They cooked up a punch list that was applied to every single one of the handholds that was installed, some of which were just needed to be kind of redone. And so part of this is we have an expectation, I have an expectation, we're not going to pay for these corrections. We're not going to pay for all the work that needs to be done to make those handholds meet them, bring them up to our level. So we expect it to be done gratis. And then the other part of the work, as I said, is pretty soon, perhaps, Green Mountain Power will be up there with a backhoe or with a excavator, actually, and they'll be trenching the east end of Old Town Road from the chasm that kind of bisects that road up to the east gate. And when that happens, we'll have to do the same thing we did last year, which was bring Eustis in, and they will work with Green Mountain Power to put our conduit in the trench along with a conduit that will be furnished by Green Mountain Power. Also conduit that will be furnished, we expect, by level 3 that also is participating in this project, and also conduit that's furnished by. So there's lots of conduit going in there, just like on the first batch. And when that gets going, we're going to want to mobilize all resources to make sure that gets done properly the first time. So that's the big piece. That's the Old Town Road report. And then the other report is minimally consequential, trying to make sure that when the time comes for us to build out the hub in Middlebury, that the connectivity from the hub to Green Mountain Power is to everyone's satisfaction, which was raised with them last time Ellie and I met with them last month. So there's a couple of things going on. From my perspective, it should be heartening to our audience that just because nothing's going on with BEAD, it doesn't mean that we're not doing anything. We're very busy still.
Oh, yeah. Lots going on. Okay, and then we talked about continuity of operations, and the final thing to discuss on the parking lot here is cybersecurity. And so Roger did bring this up last week that he and his insurance firm are having a look at that. So that is it for the parking lot.
Ellie, what about item 10 and 13 on the parking lot? I'm wondering why 10 is even there anymore.
That's a good point. Let me share the screen again so we can see what it is. So the fiber overbuild public facing guideline. So we don't actually have anything up on our website that talks about the policy that we've agreed here, which is that we are not like we are. Let me go back. So we had a conversation a very long time ago about when do we consider ourselves to be finished? Do we consider ourselves to be finished when every address in Addison County has fiber, or when every address in Addison County has broadband? So that's question number one. And then point number two is we have a policy that we have agreed here that is, as a matter of fact, still not up on the website, but we could put it up on the website, which talks about that if another provider has fiber, then our typical action is not to overbuild that unless we are not to put fiber where there's existing fiber unless we need it to get from one place to another. Not that we won't make exceptions to that, but that is our typical standard policy. So if we're in agreement, I mean, I think the first one is still a little bit unresolved because if memory serves, we talked about it. I can't remember what this thing we agreed to a year and a half ago said around cable versus fiber, because we know with BEAD we're going to have enough money to make sure that every address within our district has access to broadband. But addresses that have access to cable but not fiber remain unfunded by federal grants and will definitely remain unfunded by federal grants. So I don't know if we actually have decided that or not. And if we haven't decided, it's fine. We can keep silent on it because the situation changes all the time. And then when we finish with BEAD, we'll see where we are and decide what we think.
So my suggestion, we do just take it off the parking lot. I mean, we know that we have a policy. I can cook it up and distribute it again, but we've already approved it back in 24.
Yeah, I think what this task is just to get it up on the website. So I can send that policy to London Middlebury and have them put it on the website and then take it off. Okay. This is one I just kept skipping over because it didn't seem urgent, but it is an important thing to do because we do occasionally get queries from people saying, when are you coming to us?
Yep. And then the other one, Ellie, which is kind of really not, I know the answer to this, which is sell that excess 24 count cable. I know you're right that we now know how much of that cable we're going to need for our pending work, which will tell us how much we have left that we don't need. So, and I know you already did kind of an outreach on this a year or two ago, maybe, but I think, at your convenience, I'm assuming that eventually you're going to be reaching out to your same into your channel again and see if you can find anything. I tried to talk to our distributors about buying some of these fresh reels, but no interest there.
Yep. Yeah. So I think we do need to settle on, it won't be a material change, but we do need to settle on what is the scope of what we're building with ARPA this year, which I think we're very close to.
So just leave it open for now then.
Yep.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay. So it was a good discussion on the parking lot. Does anyone have any other business? Okay, so our next meeting then is in 3 weeks' time. It's July 13th. And the one item we know is that we will hopefully have a recommendation from Finance Committee on the audit RFP. That's what the schedule suggests. We just need to make sure that we're able to get a meeting of everyone and can come back with a recommendation in that time period.
Great.
All right. I think we can adjourn. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon, rest of the afternoon and evening, and we'll speak soon.
Bye-bye.